I smoke, I don't want to really think about the damaging effects I may be having on people that I care about. But it's become,
care about you.
Yeah, or care about. But the reality is, and sometimes when I'm in groups and there's an older person who's really ardent and combative on this issue, sometimes I like to do this. I like to say, that's a tobacco user, I like to say, I'm going to ask you a question, I don't want you to answer it, but I'm going to ask you an important question. How do you use tobacco around the people that you love the most? Now that's a very important question for people to think about who use tobacco, because you know what? An awful lot of tobacco users alter their tobacco use in their homes, in their cars, around their children, around their grandchildren, around the people they love most. And then I like to say, the reason we're looking at making the campus smoke-free or tobacco-free is we want to treat everybody like the people that you love the most. We want to free people from the exposure to secondhand smoke. Yes, sir.
I want to go ahead and add on one more to this.
Jump on.
Why wouldn't it be something that's financial also, where it's a magnet for students that want a tobacco-free campus? Is that one too, or does it go the other way?
Well, that brings up the question of what impact does making the campus smoke-free or tobacco-free have on enrollment, which is always an important question that gets asked. But you have to be careful about how you answer that. Because we can't.
You have the international students.
Well, I was talking with somebody a minute ago earlier about international. We'll come back to international. That's a separate issue in my mind, an issue that needs to be addressed in a slightly different kind of way. But the issue of what is the impact on enrollment of institutions that have implemented these policies.
Right.
And here is what I can tell you about that. We cannot identify everybody who heard that X institution was going to be tobacco-free and decided never to submit an application or indicate any interest in that institution. How do we identify that data point? Can't do it. So when that person decides not to ever submit an application for admission, we don't know that data point, right? So here's what institutions can do. Institutions can measure their enrollment against their projections after the policy went into effect, can analyze, did our enrollment remain the same, go up, or go down after the policy went into effect. And from surveying institutions around the country, what I've determined is very few institutions had even remained the same, and very few declined, even fewer declined. Most institutions went up after the policy went into effect, against what they projected. And the other point to make is institutions are pretty good at projecting enrollment. They've become pretty sophisticated at it, admissions people have. So, that's about all you can do is say what happened after the policy went into effect. Keep in mind, when you look at traditional students, the younger students coming directly out of high school, who is the number one who are the number one influencers of a young person's decision about where to go to school? Parents of younger students coming directly out of high school. I think that's still true. Peers are important, but I think parents, and a lot of times because parents are helping pay for it. So clearly that's going to be a significant factor. If you asked parents in general, would you rather have your child go to an institution that's tobacco-free or one that's not tobacco-free? What do you think the answer to that question would be? In general. Would there be more parents who would tend to feel that that's a good thing or not? I think the answer to that is you probably, although it's hard to identify all of those data points, that would be positive or have a positive effect on your enrollment. The reality is, I think probably institutions are going to do well in the enrollment business by having, generally speaking, a policy that restricts tobacco use. Now, an exception might be an institution that's focused on the arts, because there is a whole different culture in the performing arts and the artistic world that gets at freedom and might see those kinds of things as encumbrances that really restrict or take away from the attractiveness of an institution that's geared towards the performing arts as Cornish is. I want to come to this gentleman because he had his hand up first, and then I'll come right back. Yes, sir.
So it's not significant enough in order to put it as a case?
Well, you can add. This is not exhaustive.
Oh, okay.
No way, shape, or form. I'm glad you. I don't want to. These are just some different things that I've seen and run across. But there are all kinds of other points, and you made one of them.
You know, if you have 500 institutions already, it seems like that. You know, that information or statistic ought to be up there.
Well, I often get asked that about enrollment. So I don't put everything on my slides, so I have a little something else I can throw in to sweeten it up as we go along through.
Okay. Sorry.
No. Good point. Good point. Because you're getting at something that everyone needs to understand. I don't at all. I tried to say this in my disclaimer up front. There's not just one way to do this, and I don't have all the magic answers. And I respect your point of view, and your institution will do what it will do. But I've worked at this a lot, and I'm sharing with you what I think I've learned from having done that. Now, jump in.
Do you think it would be a helpful approach to, related to something maybe people are more familiar with, especially in Washington State, another industry, the bars that have, we haven't had smoking in bars for some time, and there was a big concern about loss of clients, loss of business associated, and they found that they brought in more clients, different clients than they expected. And so, if there maybe
that's a great argument that can be used. It's a parallel argument. It's a logical argument to make. It is true that there's always the fear that business is going to be negatively affected when restrictions are placed on bars and restaurants and other kinds of businesses, and it's always been proven that that has not been the case. So it's a great argument to make, but it nonetheless is a logical extension, and you'll have people that will disagree on the basis that they'll say, well, that's apples and oranges, and you won't necessarily win everyone over. But it's a great point to make, and I'm glad you did do that. A successful campus-wide tobacco policy. And here's where we get at some of the things that I think a lot of you were asking for as you went around the room and introduced yourselves and talked about why you're here. The idea that policies have to be able to be enforced or complied with is what we're talking about here. And what I did was I looked for, most in the early days of my experience and even in my own institution, the principal predicate, the rationale for the policy was always health related. But then you kept running into the issue of people saying, I'm over 21 years of age, thank you very much, Mr. Patterson, but you're not going to tell me what's in my best interest health-wise. Sorry, that's my decision to make. And every campus has a lot of people who feel something akin to that. A resistance, a frustration that the institution is telling them what is their right to decide for themselves. Or even if they don't think about themselves, maybe they think it's not right for us to tell anyone, others, what's right. And so I started looking around for, well, how could we work at this better? How could we come up with a better rationale? And my years of working with students and with getting students to sort of go along with policy was very helpful to me. Because what I hearkened back to in trying to figure out how do you approach this was I came back to the issue of respect. I also wanted to take the frame of reference away from the tobacco user, the defensive position, and focus on the impact of the user's behavior on others and the environment. Because if we take the discussion away from the impact of the user's decision or right or perceived right to use tobacco and start focusing on what does this do to our environment, what does this do to other people, now we've taken away some of that defensive reaction process that is typical for tobacco users to have when we approach them, or anyone, or we would have when someone approaches us about our behavior.